One of the questions I get asked more often than any other question is, why does the state of Connecticut pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to help a company move from one city to the next? Why are we doing that?
We don't.
Quiet.
We don't in my administration. In a prior administration, we did pay the same number of jobs to move from Stamford to Norwich. That was done by a prior administration. It wasn't done by me. Any deal that we've done in the state of Connecticut requires the addition of jobs. And in point of fact, 1,000 jobs in the case that you're talking about. 1,000 jobs with incomes far in excess of $100,000. So when Tom says people are hurting, I'm trying to do things to bring jobs to the state. And so let's talk about reality now. You know, when we started our recovery in the state of Connecticut, which was February of 10, we have grown jobs more rapidly since February of 10, when we turned the downturn up, than any other state in New England. We're 22 percentage points ahead on new housing starts this year. Commerce Department came out just recently stating the last quarter growth. We grew at 2.8% in the final quarter of 13. We knocked the socks off of just about every other state. We were better than every other state in New England, and we knocked the socks off of most of them. You know, becoming invested in economic development and growth is really important. And you can get people to come to your state, or try to keep them in your state, or try to get jobs created. But there's other things you have to do. You have to invest in the schools. I've done it. You have to invest in the transportation infrastructure, and I've done that on your behalf. You have to improve higher education, and we're doing that, including an engineering program that will graduate 70% more students in just a few years from the University of Connecticut than it was before, in a state that's retiring engineers more rapidly than we were graduating them. This is a lot of long-term hard work. I was mayor of Stamford for 14 years. I know how hard it is to turn a place around, and we're doing it here in Connecticut.
Ambassador Foley?
Ray, this is really simple. The governor's driving jobs out of the state, and he's having to bribe people to stay here. He is anti-business. He has anti-business policies. He has an anti-business administration. Overzealous regulation. He heaped taxes on the citizens and businesses. He's driven up the cost of energy and electricity rates. Mandatory paid sick leave, other mandates on employers that raise their costs. He's simply, the rhetoric is so anti-business, and anybody, I come out of the business world, I spent 35 years in business. If I were listening to him and I were a business in Connecticut, I really would be upset. And yet, he's taking taxpayer money, billions, multiple billions of dollars at this point, to bribe people to stay here, to help him get reelected, because he knows that the job numbers are going to have something to do with people assessing his performance. And so this is purely political. He's using taxpayer money to try and get businesses to stay here, or to pay businesses to come here. Jackson Labs, $1 million a job. There isn't anybody who's ever taken a course in economics who would ever say that it made sense for a state to pay $1 million to bring a job to a state. It's simply nutty. And yet he's doing this, and he says he hasn't moved companies from one town to another, but what about Bridgewater? I know it didn't work out, and you got stuck with a $16 million remediation bill, but you can't say you didn't try. So
for 1,000 additional jobs. For 1,000 additional jobs.
For $135 million?
For a salary well in excess of $100,000.
Let me ask you this, if I can.
That's $135,000 a job, Governor, that's way too much.
Let me ask you this, Ambassador Foley. You're a businessman,
yeah,
right? You know as well as I do there are 49 other governors in this state with an incentive package ready to hand over to any company that will move into their state. When Governor Christie starts luring Connecticut companies to New Jersey, what do you do to keep them here?
Well, listen, what the governor's doing is like stepping on the accelerator and the brake of a car at the same time. He's anti-business policies and rhetoric. That's stepping on the brake. And all this corporate welfare is stepping on the accelerator. It just doesn't work. A car doesn't work very well when you're stepping on the brake and the accelerator at the same time. So all you have to do is take your foot off the brake. How about supporting employers and having policies and rhetoric that's supportive of employers, particularly job creators. You know, most of the jobs are created by small business people, and small business people struggle in Connecticut with all the regulations and taxes and extra costs. So I would just, first of all, have a pro-growth agenda that is not anti-business, it's supportive of employers, and and then you have to make sure that you're trying to bring employers here who can be competitive in Connecticut, and that's not everybody. So some of the people that these taxpayer dollars are being passed out to, you know, once these incentives wear off, they're gonna leave if they aren't already here. I mean, so.
Both of you are now under 5 minutes, so.
Sure.
So
let
keep
me
it
just,
brief.
listen, I've said it before and I'll say it again. If other states were not competing for the jobs and doing some of the things that we have to do, I'd be very happy. But you know that that's not the case. Just in California today, they passed a new package because we were getting some of their media jobs. They passed a new package appropriating $400 million. Excuse me, $329 million. New York had already done $400 million in the session because we were getting those jobs. In fact, we're getting them. NBC Sports moved from New York City and moved from Philadelphia in the Comcast combination and came to Connecticut, starting with discussions around just a few jobs that grew to hundreds and hundreds of high-paying jobs. Cigna moved its headquarters out of Philadelphia and into Connecticut as a result of what we're doing. Our investment with Jackson Labs is an investment in bioscience which is growing rapidly in the state of Connecticut. So much so that we got 35 jobs from your friend, Mr. Christie in New Jersey, to move to Branford. We're building strength in the future. You know, you reference what other states have done. That's what we're doing. We've taken their playbook. But one play that we designed ourselves talks about small business. When I became governor, there was no tools to help small businesses in the state of Connecticut. That's why we created the Small Business Express program. And we've made investments alongside of and with and in over 1,200 firms, creating over 4,000 jobs. And in many cases, we saved those small businesses because we were doing that at a time that they could not get any money from traditional banks. I'm proud of that record. I'm proud that black men and Hispanic women and Caucasian men and women and all kinds of people are finding jobs in the state of Connecticut, good paying jobs with good benefits. And if you're asking me, do I think that paid sick day is important? Yes, I do. I don't want to be served in a restaurant by somebody who's got the flu. I don't want someone taking care of my child or grandchild who's got the flu. And I certainly don't want someone showing up in a nursing home who's got the flu who can sicken and kill other people. And yet when we were running for governor, and by the way, I ran saying I supported this, the survey that year said that 69% of hourly people who did not have that benefit went to work sick because they were afraid they were going to lose their job. They served you in a restaurant. They took care of your child in a daycare center. They took care of your grandmother in a nursing home.
Yeah, Governor, when I hear you talk, and I hear all the people that I'm talking to going around the state running for governor, sometimes I wonder if we actually live in a different state. Because you're talking about having created jobs and as if this is all working and it's going well. The economy, since you became governor, has only grown 1%. Not 1% a year, 1%. You say you've created 70-some thousand jobs. There's actually, on your website, a place that says that Connecticut residents have only picked up 10,000 jobs. But the job increase that you're using, non-farm labor, we picked up the year before you became governor. After the recession, the bottom of the recession, we picked up 25,000 jobs. While you've been governor, we've only picked up, on average, 15,000 jobs a year. And in the last year, 9,200 jobs. So, Governor, this is not working. We have the worst job recovery rate, or one of the worst in the country. And Massachusetts, our neighbor, they've had economic growth of 11% since the bottom of the recession. So it's not regional. It's what you're doing, sir. You are hurting the citizens of this state with your policies. And if you don't believe it, go out and talk to the people I've been talking to. The people who are losing jobs, the people whose incomes are declining, the people who lost jobs because of your policies and have had to take on lower paying jobs, or retired people who thought they were going to be able to retire at 65 and are still working 68, 69, 70 because the cost of living is going up, and your policies are keeping people from having their incomes go up. I think you live in a big mansion up there in Hartford. You got a driver that takes you around. You need to get out and talk to the citizens of Connecticut because they don't feel that your policies are working.
So you have less than 2 minutes.
So Tom, you've made a reference to Malloy math. You've created your own mathematics. The reality is we've created 60,000 private sector jobs since Nancy and I were sworn into office. And every time you say it isn't true, somebody looks at it and they say, no, it is true. An independent person, newspapers, columnists, they've all done the numbers, Tom. But I understand that what you have to do is make everyone feel as bad as they can and make things out as bad as they can possibly be. So let me say this, that we're working really hard to sustain Connecticut in its future path of creating jobs, of investing in infrastructure, of improving in education. And we're doing that as rapidly as we can for ourselves, for future generations, for the state of Connecticut. We're working really hard. And when you say policies, the one policy you mentioned in all of your diatribe tonight was the idea that someone, after working 120 hours in a job, could accumulate 1 hour of sick time for every 40 hours they work. Up to 5 maximum. And by the way, if you get vacation, you don't get that either. So here you talk about where I live, Tom. You live in Greenwich. Great place. I love it. Lots of friends there. But really, people in glass houses probably shouldn't throw stones. When I went to Sprague, I didn't get out of the back seat of a BMW.
All right, come on. All right, Governor, you're down to 30 seconds at this point.
So let me talk about these labor numbers because they really are important. There's a non-farm labor number, and that's what the governor is quoting. And what he doesn't tell you is that private sector wages in the last year have gone down. So the GDP in the state has only increased 1% while he's been governor. So if he's created 70,000 jobs, that means average incomes have gone down, which they have. So it's not really a great story. But there's another set of data, which is called Connecticut resident employment. The non-farm labor data is filled out by employers. The Connecticut resident employment number is filled out by households, Connecticut residents. What the governor's including are jobs in Connecticut that are actually people who live in Massachusetts and Rhode Island and New York. And we know that on the busway, many of those construction jobs actually are going to people who live in Massachusetts. This is with Connecticut taxpayer dollars. So he's taking into account, he's including in his job numbers people who live in other states. And he's leaving out people who work on farms, people who are self-employed, and a whole host of other people who are Connecticut citizens who I assume you represent, sir, but you're not including them in your numbers. And the fact is that 10,000 job number since you were elected governor, that's what that is. That's Connecticut residents reporting whether or not they think they have a job. Yeah. That's the number I will look at when I'm governor, and that's the one I will care about because we shouldn't be spending Connecticut taxpayer dollars creating jobs for people in other states. And we should be looking after the whole, everybody in the state, not just people who don't work on farms and people who work for big companies.
Okay, we only have 30 seconds left. I want to ask one last question, if you don't mind. I want to end this on a positive note. I think the three of us can agree that Connecticut is a great place to live. It's not perfect. So forget the negative for a minute. You got 30 seconds. How do you make Connecticut even better? Governor, 30 seconds.
We continue to invest in education, in infrastructure, and in jobs. Tom, I don't believe you think that 60,000 jobs have been created and only 10,000 have gone to Connecticut residents. It's patently ridiculous. We continue to make the kinds of investments that create a state that can be competitive in aerospace, where we're #2 per capita in the nation, in bioscience, which is growing at 11% per year, in higher education, which is making great progress and employing more people.
Mr. Foley, how do we make Connecticut even better than
Well,
what
we
it
have
is?
such a fantastic state. We have hardworking people. We have a skilled workforce. We have wonderful universities and other institutions. We have a beautiful shoreline. We have a rich history. We have so many things going for us. But we have leadership that's taking us in the wrong direction, and that's the problem. You simply have to be headed. This is like a captain of a ship who's trying to get to the Caribbean, and all the passengers on the ship are seeing icebergs, and they, hey, we're going in the wrong way. So, you know, most people would say, let's get a new captain. This is a great state. We should be doing much better. We can do much better, but not with the policies that Governor Malloy has been pursuing.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen.